The Velthari Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time they had never faced a species they could not crush beneath. Their mighty fleet's Admiral Kethra stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space, and he felt nothing but contempt for the creatures who lived there. "These humans are weak," he said to his second in command. "They have only been traveling between stars for 200 years, and they think they deserve a place among the great civilizations." The Velthari were tall beings with gray skin and 4 arms and eyes that could see in spectrums that humans could not even imagine, and they had conquered 100 worlds before humanity had learned to make fire. The High Council of the Dominion had studied humanity for 50 years, and they had come to a terrible conclusion that filled them with fear, even though they would never admit it. Humans were dangerous, not because they were strong or because they had powerful weapons, but because they changed too fast and learned too quickly and refused to accept their place in the natural order of things. They took Morvac's technology and improved it within 20 years. The council leader had said during the secret meeting, the Morvacs needed 1,000 years to develop those systems, and humans just looked at them and made them better. The decision was made in that dark chamber where no record was kept, and no witness was allowed. Humanity would not be conquered. Humanity would be erased from existence. Admiral Kethra received his orders, and he smiled, because he had always enjoyed his work, and this would be his greatest achievement. The attack came on a Tuesday morning Earth time when children were going to school and workers were drinking their coffee, and no one was thinking about War 17. Human colony worlds burned in a single day. The Velthari ships appeared from faster than light travel, and they did not send warnings or demands or any communication at all, and they simply opened fire on everything that moved on the colony of New Singapore. 3 million people died in the first hour as plasma beams turned their cities into glass. And ash on Kepler Prime, the orbital defense stations, fought bravely for 6 minutes before they were torn apart by weapons that humans had never seen before. The farming world of Harvest, the people had no weapons at all, and they could only watch as death fell from the sky like burning rain. President Maria Chun was in a meeting about trade agreements when her aide burst through the door with tears running down his face, and she knew before he spoke that something terrible had happened. "How many?" she asked. 2 billion confirmed dead, and the number is still rising. She closed her eyes for one moment, and when she opened them again, she was no longer a politician thinking about elections and public opinion. She was a leader of a species fighting for survival. "Get me the Joint Chiefs and the Science Council and tell them to meet me in the Luna bunker in 1 hour." The conventional human fleet tried to fight back, and they were brave men and women who flew their ships into battle knowing they would probably die. They were right. The Velthari shields laughed at human weapons, and their plasma beams cut through human armor like it was made of paper, and in 3 days, the United Earth Coalition lost 60% of its military strength. Captain James Morrison led the last stand at the Titan shipyards where humanity had built their greatest warships, and he watched his friends die one by one as the Velthari closed in. "We cannot win this fight," his tactical officer said with despair in her voice. "No," Morrison agreed, "but we can buy time for the civilians to evacuate." He died 3 hours later when a Velthari torpedo turned his bridge into expanding gas, and his last thought was a prayer that someone somewhere was building something that could stop these monsters in the Luna bunker. President Chun stood before the survivors of her government, and she spoke words that would change the course of human history. "The Velthari do not want our surrender," she said. "They do not want our resources or our worlds or our obedience, and they want us dead, and every single human being erased from the universe." The room was silent, except for the sound of distant explosions as the enemy fleet approached Earth itself. "Why?" someone asked. "What did we do to them?" "We existed," Chun replied. "We grew too fast and learned too quickly, and they are afraid of what we might become." She turned to Dr. Heinrich Müller, who led the most secret research program in human history, and she asked him a question that had only one answer. Is Prometheus ready? The old scientist looked tired and sad and afraid, but underneath all of those things there was something else: hope. The ships are unstable, and the weapons are unpredictable, and the crews will face dangers that we cannot even calculate. He said, "But yes, Madam President, they are ready. Will they work?" Every other species in the galaxy discovered these technologies, and every single one of them decided they were too dangerous to use because the risks were too great and the consequences too terrible. That is not what I asked. Muller smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. They will work, and the Velfari will learn why humanity should never be pushed into a corner. President Chun picked up the communication device and spoke the words that would unleash weapons that broke the laws of physics themselves. Authorization code Chun Alpha 779, and the order is: Prometheus authorized. Across human space, in hidden shipyards, buried deep in asteroids, and moon scientists and engineers received the signal they had been waiting for. Time for caution was over. The time for dangerous ships had begun. In the Velfari High Council chambers, the leaders celebrated their coming victory, and they raised glasses of expensive wine and congratulated themselves on solving the human problem before it became too large to handle. They had no idea that in 12 hidden locations, humanity was preparing to break every rule of civilized warfare. They had no idea that the prey they had cornered was about to become the predator, and they had no idea that the war they had started to take human lives was about to cost them everything they had ever built. The stars themselves would tremble before this war was over. Commander Marcus Webb had served in the human fleet for 20 years, and he thought he had seen everything the universe had to offer. But when he stepped into the secret construction bay, hidden inside the asteroid called Station Omega, he realized he had been wrong. The ship floating before him was black as death itself, and shaped like nothing he had ever seen, and just looking at it made his eyes hurt in ways he could not explain. "What am I looking at?" he whispered. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood beside him, and her face showed no emotion at all, even though she had spent 10 years of her life building this impossible thing. This is the Icarus, and she's the first of 12 vessels in the Prometheus fleet, and she will either save humanity or destroy everything we know about how the universe works. Webb walked closer to the ship, and he noticed that its surface seemed to shift and move like it was not quite solid and not quite there at all. The hull is made from materials that exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. Tanaka explained, "Sometimes it is here, and sometimes it is somewhere else, and we cannot always predict which. How do you fly something like that?" Very carefully, and with a lot of prayer, she led him through the station to a briefing room where 11 other officers were waiting, and each of them had the same look of confusion and fear on their faces. "You have all been chosen because you are the best pilots and commanders in what remains of the human fleet," Tanaka began. "You have also been chosen because you have nothing left to lose." Webb thought about his wife and daughter who had died on New Singapore in the first attack, and he understood why they had picked him. The Prometheus project began 30 years ago, when our scientists discovered certain principles of physics that should not exist. Tanaka continued, "Every spacefaring species in the galaxy eventually finds these same principles, and every single one of them immediately bans all research into them." "Why?" asked Commander Diana Cross, who had lost her entire family in the colony attacks. "Because they are too dangerous and too unpredictable and too terrible to use, and any civilization that values its existence stays far away from them." She pressed a button, and images appeared on the screen showing weapons and engines and systems that made no logical sense. "We decided to build them anyway." The first image showed a swirling ball of darkness contained inside a metal sphere. "This is a contained singularity drive, and it creates a small black hole that we can control. and it allows our ships to move through space in ways that normal physics does not allow, and sometimes our ships will exist in multiple places at once, and sometimes they will not exist at all. What happens to the crew when the ship does not exist? Webb asked. We are not entirely sure, and the test pilots reported strange experiences, but none of them could describe what they saw. The second image showed a cannon that seemed to vibrate even in the still picture. This is a Heisenberg cannon, and it fires concentrated uncertainty at enemy ships, and when the beam hits a target, every possible outcome happens at the same time, and then reality picks one outcome at random. So we might destroy them, or we might not, or they might never have existed at all, or they might exist in a different form, or something might happen that we cannot predict, because the weapon operates outside normal cause and effect. Commander Cross leaned forward with interest. What about that one? She pointed at an image of a torpedo that seemed to exist slightly before and after the moment the picture was taken. Paradox torpedoes, and they are my personal favorite, Tanaka said with something like pride in her voice. They destroy their targets before they are fired, so by the time you launch them, your enemy is already dead. The room was silent as the officers tried to understand weapons that broke the rules of time itself. The crews of these ships will face dangers that we cannot calculate, Tanaka admitted. Some of you may simply stop existing, and some of you may become spread across time, and some of you may come back changed in ways we cannot predict. But we might win, Webb said. You might save every human being who is still alive. And that is why we built these ships, because we are of options and out of time, and the Valkyrie are coming to finish what they started. She turned off the screen and looked at each of them in turn. You are all volunteers, and if any of you want to leave now, I will not blame you, and no one will think less of you. No one moved. Good, and now let me introduce you to your ships. They walked through corridors that seemed longer on the inside than they should be, and they saw engineering systems that made experienced officers feel like children who did not understand anything. The 12 ships waited in their bays, and each one was painted black, and each one carried a name from human mythology. The Icarus and the Prometheus and the Nemesis and the Pandora, and 8 others named for things that brought change and destruction and transformation. We call ourselves the Prometheus Corps, Tanaka said, and we wear black because we are already dead, and we have already accepted that we may never come home. Webb touched the hull of the Icarus, and it felt wrong against his fingers, like it was vibrating at frequencies that human skin should not feel. When do we launch? He asked. The Valkyrie fleet will reach Earth in 72 hours, and we launch in 12. He nodded and turned to face his crew, who had gathered behind him. And they were scared and confused, but they were also ready. You heard the doctor, and we have 12 hours to learn how to fly a ship that breaks physics and fire weapons that break reality. And then we are going to show those aliens what happens when they try to kill our species. His crew saluted, and he saw determination in their eyes. The Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake. They had pushed humanity to the edge of extinction, and humanity had decided to push back with weapons that civilized species were too afraid to use. The dangerous ships were ready, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Kethra stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sword of Dominion, and watched his fleet of 400 warships move toward the Proxima Centauri system, where the last major concentration of human vessels waited to die. Sensor report, he commanded. 37 human ships detected, and they are forming a defensive line around the colony. But they have no chance against our forces. Kethra felt something close to pity for the humans who refused to accept their fate and kept fighting even when the mathematics of war made their defeat absolutely certain. We will be merciful and make it quick, he said. All ships prepare to engage. His tactical officer studied her screens and then made a confused sound that Kethra had never heard from her before. Admiral, there is something strange, and our sensors are detecting a 38th ship. But the readings make no sense. Explain. The ship appears to be there, but also not there, and our computers cannot determine its size or shape or weapons, and the readings change every time we scan it. Kethra looked at the main viewer and saw a black shape that seemed to absorb light itself, floating among the human vessels. What is that thing? No one could answer him, Commander Marcus. Webb sat in the captain's chair of the Icarus, and his hands were shaking slightly as he looked at the massive Valkyrie fleet approaching his position. All systems report. He ordered, Singularity drive is stable at 63%, and the other 37% is doing something we cannot explain. His engineer reported, Heisenberg cannons are charged and ready, and I have no idea what they will do when we fire them. His weapons officer added, Navigation is showing me 17 different versions of the battlefield at once. Navigator Sarah Chun said calmly, I recommend we pick one and commit to it. Webb took a deep breath and opened a channel to the conventional. Human ships. This is Commander Webb of the Icarus, and we are here to help, and I need all of you to fall back to a safe distance when we engage. Safe distance from what? The commander of the human fleet asked. From us. The Valkyrie fleet opened fire, and plasma beams streaked across space toward the human ships, but the Icarus did not move, and it did not fire, and it simply sat there as death approached. Then it activated its singularity drive. The Icarus vanished from normal space and appeared in 17 different locations at once, and each version of the ship was equally real and equally there. Meryl. Kethra watched his tactical display go insane as the single black ship became many ships, and none of them and all of them at the same time. What is happening? He demanded. The ship is everywhere, Admiral, and we cannot target it because it does not have a single location. Then fire at all the locations. His ships obeyed, and they poured fire into every point where the Icarus might exist, but the beams passed through empty space or hit versions of the ship that were not quite real enough to be damaged, and then the Icarus fired back the Heisenberg cannon. Beams struck the Sword of Dominion, and something impossible happened. The shields did not fail in the normal way, where they overloaded and collapsed, and instead, every possible outcome of the beam hitting the shields happened at the same moment. In one reality, the shields held perfectly. In another reality, they never existed in another reality. The ship itself had never been built in another reality. The beam turned into flowers, and then reality chose which outcome would be real, Admiral. Kethra had one moment to feel fear, and then he simply ceased to exist as his flagship unraveled at the atomic level, and its matter forgot that it had ever been organized into a ship. 63 Valkyrie vessels died in the first exchange, and they did not explode or break apart, but simply stopped being real as the probability waves collapsed in ways that favored their destruction. All ships retreat. Someone screamed over the Valkyrie communication network, but it was too late for many of them. Icarus was everywhere, and its weapons were impossible to predict, and the mighty Valkyrie fleet scattered like frightened animals, running from a predator they could not understand on the bridge of the Icarus navigator. Chun was experiencing time in a way that human beings were not meant to experience it. I can see next week, she reported with a strange calmness in her voice. And also yesterday, and also a moment that does not exist in any timeline I recognize. Can you see if we win? Webb asked. I can see many outcomes, and in most of them we survive this battle. But the things I'm seeing are changing me, Commander, and I do not think I will be the same person when this is over. Webb watched the Valkyrie ships running away, and he felt no joy in their destruction, because he knew that his crew was paying a price that could not be measured. Engineering report damage. We have no damage in the conventional sense, but 3 crew members have become temporarily smeared, and they exist across multiple moments simultaneously, and they are asking questions about events that have not happened yet. The human ships that had watched from a safe distance were sending messages of amazement and gratitude, but Webb could not respond because he was trying to hold his ship and his crew together in a universe that no longer made sense. The enemy fleet has retreated, and we have won the battle. His tactical officer reported casualties. 7 crew members have experienced temporal displacement, and 2 more have stopped existing in ways that our sensors cannot explain, but everyone else is still here. Webb closed his eyes and thought about the families of those 9 people, and how he would explain that they had not died exactly, but had simply become uncertain. Send the message to command. He said finally, tell them the Icarus is operational, and the weapons work, and we are ready for the next battle. He did not add that he was terrified of what they had unleashed. The galaxy had just learned that humanity was willing to break the laws of physics to survive, and this was only the beginning. The Velthari High Council chamber had never known fear in 12,000 years of dominion over the stars, but on this day, every member sat in stunned silence as the reports came in from the front lines. The 3rd Fleet has been destroyed, the military advisor said with a trembling voice. Admiral Kethra is confirmed as non-existent, and we do not mean dead, because dead implies a body, and there is no body, and there is no evidence he ever lived at all. High Counselor Marith rose from her seat, and her 4 arms were shaking in. A High Counselor Marith rose from her seat, and her 4 arms from her seat, and her 4 arms were shaking in a way that showed extreme distress among her species. How is this possible? And the humans were supposed to be primitive and weak and easily crushed. They have built weapons that should not exist, and ships that operate outside normal physics, and we have no defense against them. Across the galaxy, the black ships of the Prometheus, course struck without warning and without mercy, and the Velthari learned what it meant to face an enemy that did not play by the rules. The Nemesis appeared above the Velthari shipyard at Koroth Prime, where 300 warships were being constructed, and Commander Elena Vasquez gave the order to fire the Paradox torpedoes. The weapons launched from her ship, and something impossible happened. The shipyard exploded 3 days before the torpedoes were fired. Velthari engineers, who had been working on the station, found themselves suddenly floating in space, surrounded by debris, and their last memories were of eating lunch and checking systems. And then, nothing made sense anymore. The station was destroyed yesterday. One survivor reported to the rescue ships, but I was there this morning, and I remember being there, and how can both things be true? No one could answer him. The Pandora engaged a Velthari battle group near the Arcturus system and used weapons called entropy accelerators that made time move faster for anything they hit. Enemy ships aged 1,000 years in seconds, and their crews turned to dust, and their hulls rusted and crumbled, and their reactors burned out long before anyone could fire a single shot in response. Commander Cross on the Prometheus itself led the most dangerous mission of all. She took her ship directly into the heart of the Velthari home fleet, where 3,000 warships protected the approaches to the Dominion capital world. Commander, this is suicide, our first officer said. Even with our weapons, we cannot defeat 3,000 ships. We are not going to fight them. Cross replied, we are going to erase them. She had lost her husband and her 3 children and her parents and her sister in the initial attacks, and she had volunteered for this mission, knowing she would not survive, but she would make certain the Velthari remembered what they had started. Activate the causality bomb. The weapon at the heart of the Prometheus was the most terrible device humanity had ever created, and it worked by removing things from the timeline entirely, not destroying them, and making it so they had never existed at all. The Velthari commander saw the black ship approaching and ordered all weapons to fire, but it was too late. The causality bomb detonated, and a wave of impossible energy spread outward, and everything it touched simply stopped being real. 3,000 warships vanished, not exploded, not destroyed. They were removed from history itself. The Velthari crews had never been born, and their ships had never been built, and the resources used to construct them had been used for something else entirely Commander Cross and her crew vanished with them because that was the price of using such a weaponer. Last transmission was recorded by a distant human probe, and it contained only 2 words. Worth it, on Earth President. Chun watched the battle reports with tears running down her face because they were winning, but the cost was beyond anything she had imagined. How many crews have we lost? She asked Admiral Webb, who had survived enough impossible battles that his hair had turned white from the strain. 217 crew members are confirmed as non-existent, and another 143 are temporarily displaced, which means they are alive, but spread across time in ways we cannot fix, and 89 more have been changed in ways our doctors cannot explain. And the Prometheus, gone along with Commander Cross and all hands, and they took 3,000 enemy ships with them. Chun sat down heavily and tried to process the numbers. What about the enemy casualties? Conservative estimates suggest we have eliminated approximately 60% of their total military strength, and their shipyards are destroyed or damaged, and their supply lines are broken. Are they surrendering? Not yet, but our intelligence suggests. The High Council is in emergency session, and there are reports of panic among their civilian population. The war was not over, but for the first time since the attacks began, humanity was winning on. The Icarus commander Webb addressed his crew, who had been fighting for 3 weeks straight, and who had seen things that would haunt them forever. I know you are tired, and I know you are afraid, and I know that some of you are not sure if you are still the same person you were when this started. Navigator Chen looked at her hands, which sometimes showed her as a young woman, and sometimes as an old one, and sometimes as something in between. But we are winning, and every day we fight is another day that humans survive, and another day that our species has a future. What happens when the war ends? Someone asked, can we go back to normal? Webb did not answer because he did not know if there was a normal to go back to. Valkyrie had wanted to exterminate humanity, and instead they had forced humans to become something new and something terrible, and something that the galaxy would fear for generations to come. Tide had turned, but the final battle was still to come. The final battle took place above the Valkyrie homeworld, where the last of their great fleet made its stand against the 7 remaining ships of the Prometheus. Kor's High Council Amurath watched from her palace as the black ships appeared in her sky, and she knew with absolute certainty that her civilization was about to end. We should have left them alone, she said to no one in particular. We should have let them grow and spread and become whatever they were meant to become. They would have eventually threatened us, her advisor replied. Perhaps, or perhaps they would have been our greatest allies. And now we will never know, because we tried to kill them, and they decided to break the universe to survive. The Icarus led the attack, and Commander Webb felt like an old man even though he was only 43 years old, because the temporal stresses of commanding a ship that existed outside normal time had aged him in ways that went beyond the physical. All ships report status, he ordered. Nemesis ready and weapons charged. Pandora standing by. Achilles online and crew is experiencing moderate temporal displacement, but we can still fight. The other ships reported similar conditions, and Webb realized that none of them would survive this war unchanged, and that the people who flew these ships were already casualties. Even if they were still breathing, the Valkyrie fleet is moving to intercept. His tactical officer reported, 800 ships remaining, and they are putting everything between us and their planet. Then we go through them. The battle lasted 6 hours, and it was the strangest and most terrible engagement in the history of warfare. Ships that existed in multiple timelines fought against vessels that did not know if they were already destroyed or not yet built. Weapons that operated on probability struck shields that existed only sometimes. Crews experienced time moving backwards and forwards and sideways, and some of them saw their own deaths before they happened, and some of them died before they were born. When it was over, the Valkyrie fleet was gone, and the skies above their homeworld were empty, except for the 5 ships that remained from the Prometheus cores, the Icarus and the Nemesis and the Achilles, and 2 others that were so badly damaged that they barely existed at all. "Hail the surface," Webb ordered. High Counselor Marith appeared on his screen, and she looked older than she had in the intelligence photos, and her 4 arms hung limply at her sides. "Human Commander, you have won, and I am prepared to discuss terms of surrender." "No terms," Webb replied. "Unconditional surrender, or we continue until there is nothing left of your civilization. You would destroy our entire species. You tried to destroy ours, and you killed billions of our people, and you gave us no choice but to become monsters to survive." Marith closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there were tears flowing down her gray face. "I will broadcast our surrender to the galaxy, and every Valkyrie force will stand down immediately." "That is not enough. What more do you want?" "I want you to explain to every species watching what you did and why. And I want you to tell them that humanity was peaceful until you tried to exterminate us, and I want the galaxy to know that we did not start this war." The surrender, BRODCAST, was transmitted across every communication network in the known galaxy, and trillions of beings watched as the mighty Valkyrie Dominion admitted defeat to a species they had tried to erase from existence. "We attacked humanity without provocation," Marith said. "We sought to destroy them because we feared what they might become. And we were right to fear because they have become something that no species should ever face." She paused, and her voice trembled. "They built weapons that break the laws of physics and ships that exist outside normal space, and they crewed these vessels knowing they might cease to exist, and they did all of this because we gave them no other choice." The galaxy listened in horror and wonder. Let this be a warning to any species that might consider attacking humanity in the future, and they do not fight like civilized beings, and they do not respect the unwritten rules that all other species follow, and when pushed to extinction, they will burn the universe itself to survive. The transmission ended, and the war was over. 6 months later, Admiral Webb stood at the memorial service for the Prometheus cores, and he looked at the names carved into the black stone monument. 847 volunteers had crewed the 12 ships of the fleet. 156 had returned. The rest were listed as casualties of a type that had never existed before, and some had simply stopped being real, and some were spread across time, and some had been changed into things that could no longer be called human. "They say we fight dirty," Webb said in his speech to the survivors and the families of the lost. "They say we broke rules that every civilized species respects, and they are right." He paused and looked up at the stars that had tried to kill his people. "But we are still here, and our children will grow up, and our species will continue, and that is all that matters in the end." The dangerous ships were decommissioned because they were too unstable to maintain, and most of them barely existed anymore anyway. The Icarus was placed in a memorial orbit around Earth's sun, where it would drift forever as a reminder and a warning. President Chun signed a peace treaty with the Valkyrie that included reparations and technology transfers, and a formal apology that would be broadcast every year for the next 1,000 years. But more important than any of that was the reputation that humanity had. Earned word spread to every corner of the galaxy about the species that had built impossible ships and crewed them with volunteers who accepted their own destruction and fought a war against the laws of physics themselves. Other species looked at humanity differently after that. They traded with humans and welcomed human explorers and shared knowledge freely because they all remembered what happened when someone tried to push humanity to extinction, and deep within classified facilities on Earth and Luna and Mars, scientists continued to study the principles behind the Prometheus weapons because they knew that someday another threat might emerge. The dangerous ships were gone, but the knowledge remained, and humanity would never forget what they were capable of when survival was on the line. Commander Webb retired to a small house on the coast of what had once being California, and he spent his remaining years watching the ocean and trying not to think about the things he had seen. Sometimes, Navigator Chen visited him, and they would sit in silence together because they were the only ones who truly understood what they had experienced. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked him once. "I think we did the only thing," he replied. "And that is not the same as the right thing, but it is what we had." She nodded, and they watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, and somewhere above them the Icarus drifted through the void, a monument to humanity's survival, a warning to any who might threaten them again, a reminder that some prices are too high to calculate, but sometimes you pay them anyway, because that is what it means to be human. The end.